that was my little history with going back to China. Yeah, so welcome to you, Afi. This is the opening debut episode, if you will, of Both Sides Now, 观望东西，聆听左右. Today we are in conversation with Api Ngo, that Chinese history guy, connecting with a fellow overseas-born Chinese who is currently documenting China's past, and hopefully, if time permits, we'll talk a little bit about China's present as well. As China reconnects with the world, it might be useful to pick up a set of tools to help us to decode the worldviews that determine or set the parameters of their behavior. So Api and myself, we are part of the overseas Chinese diaspora. This is the largest diaspora in the world, collectively making up between 40 to 50 million individuals and narratives, depending on who you read. And this number is significant because it will make the 30th largest country. Now, the number may seem like a lot, but it's really a speck of a speck in the scheme of 1.4 billion people in the current geopolitical boundaries of modern China. And I really wanted to connect with RP because of this book that I've read, China's Fourth Rise. So, RP, we've spoken a little bit about, when we were preparing for this conversation, about your passion and love for Chinese history. Yes. And we spoke about your familiarity with Professor Wang Gongwu, whose book I have over here, and he speaks a lot about what is unique about the Chinese history is their ability to harness central power, which is something that I'm hoping to unpack a little bit more with you today in our podcast. So Api, if I could hand the time over to you. Api is the creator of the YouTube channel, That Chinese History Guy. Thank you so much for being here today to help me unpack the history of the Chinese model. Warm welcome to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hello, Bob. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. And I am a Chinese guy by ethnicity living in Singapore. I believe I'm a fourth generation Singaporean now. Yeah, my great-granddad came over from China. My grandfather was born here. So yeah, third or fourth gen. I always get mixed up.
Yeah, because there's the overseas Chinese label, which is doesn't include the overseas born bit. So I think so fourth generation.
So which generation do you start counting from? You know,
I wish there was a clear resource I could consult to get an answer to that, because I get the number. Am I second or third?
Yeah,
I'm not sure too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So and as you mentioned, I am a storyteller on YouTube. I run That Chinese History Guy channel, or I'm That Chinese History Guy, sharing the myths, legends, and histories of the Chinese people from the first creator to the last imperial dynasty. And the objective is to try to share all 5,000-6,000 years worth of stories, one video at a time.
That sounds like a massively epic project.
What was I thinking?
5,000 to 6,000 years of recorded Chinese history.
No, not recorded. I mean, recorded would be about 3,000 years, but we have the myths, we have the legends, and everything.
I see. That's why it's so expansive. The myths, the legends, right down to the officially recorded histories, which is dating back 3,000 years. So right now you are at episode 95.
95 videos, yes.
And I understand that your videos are approximately like 15 to 20 minutes each. Wow. What's your workflow and process like when it comes to producing your work? That's what I'm very curious about.
Glad you asked. Basically, the writing alone takes about 4 to 6 hours per script.
Yeah,
that's just the writing. After I got everything together and sorted, the writing alone was 4 to 6 hours. The shooting part is the easiest. I shoot 1.5 hours per video and then edit it down. Editing would be another 6 to 8 hours. That would include making the maps and making the other resources that might be needed for the video to tell the story. And research is never ending. So I'm always either reading something or translating something into stuff that I can use for the script or for the video.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I work about 12 to 14-hour days. Just to run the channel. I mean, on top of all the social media stuff that you have to handle as a creator today.
Mm-hmm.
That is like the physical workflow of it. Thank God, or thank the powers that be, or as a Chinese, thank the heavens. I do not really have to work out the sequence of events or the sequence of the stories or chapters or episodes. I use a generally accepted sequence, which are basically generally recognized throughout the Chinese history world. So any Chinese history book or compendium you find, they would list out these events in more or less the same order. Sometimes, of course, I have to move things a bit around for continuity's sake. But so that is one big problem off my back. So I don't have to decide which chapter comes before or after which chapter. So that's all taken care of because I have this series of books that does that for me already. All I have to do is just to do my own research and seek out the source texts, figure out what the source texts are saying, and then translate it first to modern Chinese and then translate that to modern English so that my audience can understand these stories and what happens in them. And that is basically one of the primary reasons why I started this channel, to give access to people who might be interested in Chinese history and Chinese culture, but have always faced this obstacle of language. They could not read or they could not understand the language, so they could not have access to this rich, interesting stories and histories and events that happen. And so, that's me in a long-winded nutshell.
Yeah, in some ways, providing a bridge, and
hopefully
like a Western frame. I think if I'm quoting you correctly from an earlier conversation.
Yes, in a way. I mean, not so much a Western frame, but more of the Eastern narration of Chinese history, but just presented in another language. Rather than being the Western framing of Chinese history. So if we are talking about the Western framing of Chinese history, we are talking about sinology as what is being taught in Cambridge or Oxford. But sometimes you'll find very different approaches and angles to similar events. If we read the academia from the East, from China, and the academia from the West, from UK or America. So that is actually quite interesting to a certain extent. We might talk about that in some future episodes if we actually do that.
So rather than just being fixated on one point of view or one perspective, balancing it out from perhaps where it happened, or at least an interpretation coming from the people where the event had occurred.
I mean, tell the story as the original people told it, without a colored lens over it or something.
And of course, along the way, things get lost in interpretation, whether it's meaning or values. So if I could kind of dive into your latest episode, it was Death by Crocodiles, and sorry for kind of jumping around the questions.
Actually, the episode was King Zhou's Southern Expedition, but the thumbnail is Death by Crocodiles. Clickbait,
So this was episode 22 in 8th of February this year. So it's
episode
an episode about King Wen.
King Zhou of the Zhou Dynasty.
I see.
King Zhou of the Zhou Dynasty will be King Wen's great grandson. Wen Wu, Chen Kang Zhao. His great grandson.
I see.
So yes.
One of the key themes, I think it really stuck in my mind because it's something that my dad would usually talk about when I was growing up with him, is that prosperity does not last beyond 3 generations. So what are some lessons we can draw from that example in Chinese history?
Actually, it's not just Chinese history. Interestingly, in the comment section of that video, one of my viewers, one of the audience, actually said that there was a similar saying reflected in Arabic saying that, you know, prosperity or good times do not last through a few generations.
Yeah.
So, and then I guess this is a very universal idea that things are not always rosy, and especially, you know, it doesn't last through generations. I think there's this saying that hard times create strong men, and strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times.
Like
that cycle that goes on and on. And yeah, universal concept. And I believe, this is my personal opinion, that underlying this issue, the problem is that we all forget, all of us, you know, no exception. We do not learn the lessons that our predecessors went through. I mean, much as we like to think that we would, you know, learn lessons, we always forget, and we will go on to repeat the same mistakes and the same errors that our ancestors and our predecessors go through, because life got too good, we got too arrogant, and we got too complacent. And this is something we always have to keep in mind. And usually we remember to keep it in mind for about 2 to 3 generations, and then the whole cycle repeats itself again because life got too good, life got too comfortable. Yeah,
that is certainly a very insightful observation. So if I could maybe present you with the unenviable task of giving us like a chronological landscape of recorded Chinese history, what does that look like? It sounds like, if I could hand the time over to you.
Okay. This is going to take a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chinese history, if we are going to talk about the whole series of dynasties and events, so we will start with the Age of Myth, which is a lot of legends and a lot of pseudo history. We will go to the Age of Myth, where we have the 3 sovereigns and the 5 tearchs, or the 5 emperors, San Huang Wu Di. So that is the Age of Myth. It will last from the first creator, from Pangu's creation of the world, until the semi-mythical figure of Da Yu, the flood tamer, who would presumably be one of the founders of the Xia Dynasty. Now, the Xia Dynasty is still a hotly contested dynasty. There are no actual proof of its existence, but apart from ancient writings. So next, after the Xia Dynasty, it is an archaeologically proven dynasty that existed from around the 1675 BC to around 1046 BC. This would be the Shang Dynasty. And we have oracle bones and oracle bone script, which is the first form of Chinese writing that has been unearthed. And so we have proved that the Shang Dynasty exists between the 1675 BC to 1046 BC. And after that, and this is the series that I'm doing right now on my channel, is the Zhou Dynasty.
Zhou Dynasty.
And this will be the first officially documented and archaeologically proven dynasty in Chinese history. Officially documented as in that we have first-hand source text that comes from this period of time, and you know, that documents the events, like official documentation with official court historians of the period. So this Zhou Dynasty, technically, it would last from 1046 BC to 256 BC. And the longest ruling history in
700 years or so.
900. 700-800 years. So technically the longest ruling dynasty in Chinese history. However, the Zhou dynasty itself was broken up into a few separate pieces. So it started with the Western Zhou dynasty, which actually lasts from 1046 BC until roughly about 771 BC. And this breaking point, this transition point would be the moving of the official capital of the Zhou ruling house from Haojing in around Xi'an area to Luoyang, which they call the eastern capital. And so therefore, from the western Zhou, we move into the eastern Zhou. And the eastern Zhou itself is basically split into two eras as well, the spring and autumn period and the warring states period. So the spring and autumn period would be the 771 BC to about 476 BC. Now, the exact date is actually disputed as well, because depending on which event you take as a breaking point. So that would be the spring and autumn. Usually we say 476 BC because that's when the state of Jin was split into the state of Zhao Wei and Han. And from there onwards is the warring states period, where you have these major, massive wars and battles that was going on to assert dominion over the realm. And that would end in 221 BC under the Qin Dynasty, which, as we all know, is founded by the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi. So that would be the end of the entire pre-dynasty, pre-empire China. So that is what do you call that? A breaking point of two major blocks of Chinese history, what we call the pre-Qin era and the post-Qin era, the pre-empire days and the post-empire days. So from the Qin dynasty onwards, we have the Chinese emperors. Before that, we don't have emperors, and we don't have the Chinese empire as we know it. You know, so from the Qin dynasty, 221 BC onward, Qin dynasty lasted for a very short time, less than 20 years, 221 BC to 206 BC, and then they were overthrown by the Han, which itself technically survived from 206 BC to 220 AD or 220 CE. Technically, because once again, it's split into a few parts. The Western Han will be 206 BC until 9 AD, from Liu Bang's overthrowing of the Qin dynasty until the Wang Mang rebellion. And in between, we have this very short period of time from 9 AD to 23 AD, where Wang Mang built the Xin dynasty, Xin Cao, you know, in a way proclaiming that what he's bringing to the realm is something new and something innovative. And that would last until 23 AD with the sacking of Chang'an, and Liu Xiu, descendant of the original Han royal family, would reclaim the Han throne and once again move the capital to Luoyang. I mean, you notice a pattern here. You know, original capital will be Xi'an or Chang'an by this time, and then they will move it to Luoyang in the east, and then now it becomes the Eastern Han. And Eastern Han will, you know, reign from 25 CE until 220 CE, which would transition into what will most probably be the most popular period of Chinese history, is the Three Kingdoms period. So a lot of people will presume, because you play the games or you read the novels, that the Three Kingdoms were started from 184 or 189, but that is actually when the Yellow Turban rebellions happened. And the Three Kingdoms period was not officially in place until 220 CE, where you really literally have three kingdoms, you know, splitting up the entire Chinese empire. And so that was also when the Han finally abdicate the throne. So the real Three Kingdoms was actually 220 CE to 265 CE. After which it transitioned into a Jin Dynasty, which was 265 to 420, and then it went into like a couple of 100 years of chaos that we call the Northern and Southern Dynasty, and that is when the Northern Steppe tribes came south, and the Han people moved from the Yellow River region to the more southern Yangtze River region. That was the first big migration of the Han people from the north to the south. And it was also the first big assimilation of the northern steppes people into the Chinese, they got, what's that term called? Sinicized? The northern steppes people got sinicized, the Huns, the Jurchens, the steppe
So this
tribes.
is a Chinese way of thinking, way of behavior being adopted.
Yes,
by
so they took on, yes, exactly. This was the first major assimilation of a foreign people into becoming Chinese. I mean, these northern people, they picked up the language. They even changed their names, took on Chinese surnames, and took on Chinese cultures. In fact, they were all Sinicized during this time. And so this was a northern and southern dynasty, which was 386 AD to 589 AD. And these hundreds of years of chaos would finally, this whole land would be reunited again under the Sui dynasty, which was once again a very short-lived dynasty, only 2 generations. And this would be 581 CE until 618 CE. And during this period of time, it would be kind of the fall of Confucianism as a mainstream thought, as the only mainstream philosophy. And this was also the period of time where Buddhism and Taoism gained a much bigger foothold in the Chinese psyche. So 581 to 618, which was followed by what most historians will call the golden age of Chinese history, which is the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty would reign from 618 to 906. So this was a period of time where the very big expansion of Chinese influence spread extremely far during this time, all the way into the Persian Empire in the West, where you have these Persian traders and all the, what do you call that, all the stans, the Middle Asia small kingdoms, you know, today's Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and all these places where they will have sent envoys and traders into the Chinese empire of that time. And art was flourishing, language flourished, culture flourished, and the Chinese people exported a lot of its traditions and a lot of its culture to other countries today, like a lot of the Japanese culture and tradition, a lot of the Korean culture and tradition were actually descendants of Tang culture and Tang court etiquette. And so, in fact, a lot of these etiquettes and this culture stuff you can find in Korea and Japan, but you can't find in China today. So that is pretty interesting to me. Then from the Tang Dynasty, there were a few uprisings, and you know, of course, with every dynasty that happens. And then, but finally, it fell in 906, and it went into another period of extreme chaos. Luckily, this time it was not that long, just a few decades, which we call 五代十国, or the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, where 5 different dynasties and 10 different kingdoms were actually ruling the land at the same time. And these will all end at the end of 960 AD and coalesce or be united once again under the Zhou family. And we have the Song Dynasty, Song Cao. This will be the most culturally and economically vibrant dynasty in Chinese history, actually. A lot of these scientific innovations that we know today will always say that, oh, gunpowder was invented in China, paper was invented in China, printing press was invented in China. Well, it all happened during the Song Dynasty. And economically, it was extremely rich. If I'm not wrong, the Song Dynasty's economy, basically the economical output of the Song Dynasty took up about 80% of global economy at the time. So yeah, just think about it. 80% of the economy of the entire world came from the Song Dynasty. And this was about 960 AD to 1279 AD. And this was also the period of time where Confucianism went through a reform and a revival and became the official ideology of the Chinese people.
That's can I pause you there for a second?
Yes.
Because that's really making me think a lot about, they're willing to go back to a model from the past.
Yes.
To do things, because one might argue that most people think that's counterintuitive. You wouldn't go repeat something that's failed before, but they've given it a new lease of life. Is this the first time they've done something like this? Because
I wouldn't say that Confucianism has failed previously. It's just that things were more vibrant and more diverse during the Tang and the Sui dynasties, or even the Sui and Tang dynasty were actually more diverse. I would say it's more a case of the Song dynasty were getting more and more. This was actually the start of the Han people, the Han civilization, withdrawing more and more back into itself. And the whole idea of reviving and reforming Confucianism during the Song Dynasty was actually more political than philosophical.
I see.
Yes, and there's a reason why I don't really like the Song Dynasty, but maybe we'll get to that later.
Right.
Yeah, but Song Dynasty, to continue with this narration, biggest economy in the world, and the economy of the Song Dynasty was 3 times the size of the entire European economy of the time. Sorry, I might have made a bit of a mistake. But the Song Dynasty, the same thing, it was split into Northern Song and Southern Song. The Northern Song had their capital in Kaifeng, today's Kaifeng, if I'm not wrong. So that was from 960 AD until 1127 AD, where the biggest humiliation the Han dynasties has ever experienced happened, where Emperor Jing and Emperor Kang of the Song dynasty was actually taken hostage and brought back to the north by the Jurchens who were invading. And so they lost 2 emperors at the same time, mind you. It was not like one after the other. They took both of them at the same time. And the Jurchens swept south, and the Song were facing defeat after defeat, and they had to retreat south of the Yangtze and rebuild the whole court there with, I think, a Khadar branch of the Zhou family. And that is where we call the Southern Song. And they were very comfortable and very, very vibrant culture and economy in the Southern Song as well. And that would be from 1127 AD to 1279 AD until that was when the Mongols came. And the Mongols took care of the Jurchens in the north, and they swept even further south, and they finally forced the entire Southern Song court. Actually, I'm not exaggerating, this is really what happened. The entire Southern Song court, in a bid to escape the Mongols, actually had to retreat all the way out into the sea. Like, they built ships, and the entire court went onto the ships, and they lost all the landmass, and they had to go to the sea. And the last emperor of the Song dynasty actually drowned in the sea. He died, he drowned. And that was the official end of the Song as we know it. So yeah, the Mongols came, 1279, and short-lived dynasty from Kublai to, I think, his grandson or his great-grandson, 1368 BC, where the Han people once again rose up and retook the realm, retook the throne, and formed the Ming Dynasty from 1368 to 1644. And there's this running joke about the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty has 16 emperors, but there were only 2.5 good ones. The rest of them are practically idiots. So that's a running joke about the Ming Dynasty. And then the Ming Dynasty fell in 1644 to the descendants of the Jurchens, who by now call themselves the Manchurians. And they were swept in 1644 and built the Qing Dynasty. And this will be the last imperial dynasty in China, and it will last until 1912. In 1911, Dr. Sun Yat-sen would instigate the uprising, and then in 1912, the last emperor of China would abdicate, and China would officially move into Republican China in 1912. So yeah, that's about what, 5,000-6,000 years of Chinese history in a nutshell. Sorry for going on and on for that bit. Yeah.
Thank you so much for unpacking that chronology for us. Some keywords that kind of popped in my mind as I was hearing your narration were, it seems to be, I think, first a trend of centralizing and then disintegrating, and then centralizing again, and then disintegrating again. That's number one. And number two, I think if there's a dividing line, there's the pre-Qin
Yes.
And the post-Qin significant because before that it was largely feudal. There was a lot of disintegrated states, and then post-Qin you finally had some semblance of central power.
Yes.
So those are my two takeaways. Have I missed out on anything you reckon so far?
No.
Yeah.
That's basically it. I mean,
thank you for the education. That's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Woo.
That's super cool. So sorry for that really big and open-ended epic question at the very beginning.
No worries.
But if we could maybe now narrow it down a little,
Yes.
and let's spend some time talking about your favorite dynasty and why that would be the case. And then leading on from that, what's the one that you least like? We'll start with the one that's your favorite.
My favorite would be the Qin Dynasty, actually. Short-lived as it may be, and generally hated as it may be. I really just love how this whole Qin Dynasty happened, because it did not happen in one generation. It happened...
Historically, it's 15 years or so, the Qin Dynasty.
Yes, in existence.
You can't just look at that period in isolation, because there was some, from an earlier conversation, some intergenerational setting up to get up to that point. So
it took about 6 generations of setting up for that to happen. Started from the time where the Qin state were not even considered, they did not even have the title of kings at that time. They were just dukes.
So is that one level down? So if you can help me unpack that.
One level down from king. So noble titles, we have the king or the prince, depending on which version you use. So you have the kings, the dukes, the marquess, then the counts, the viscounts, if I'm not wrong. So they were still dukes at that time, and they were the weakest state among the warring states, the weakest and most looked down upon. The Qin people were considered half savages. They were not even considered civilized Han people at that time. That was about 360, 365 BC. It was said that when Confucius himself was traveling around the realm to spread his teaching, he refused to step into the lands of the Qin people. That was how uncivilized that the Central Plain civilization felt they were. That even Confucius would refuse to step into the Qin state.
Wow. So they're really at the periphery.
Yeah, they were really at the periphery. And,
physically and also as part of the culture.
Yes. Oh, yeah. They live all the way to the west.
Yeah.
Like really to the west in where would be today's even more west than Xi'an today. So that was the western tip of the land at that time. And so it took from Qin Xiaogong, Duke Xiao of Qin, from his generation, he instituted political and legal reforms, and he employed the ideologies of the legalist school of thought, which was kind of counter culture, because Confucianism and Wang Dao was the mainstream ideology of the realm at that time. So he went the other way. He went with legalism and all its pragmatic ideas. He used that and started the reform, and it took 6 generations, about 5 to 6 generations, and it really built up the entire laid down the thick foundation that they needed. From being the smallest and the weakest and the poorest state, they managed over 6 generations to build up enough foundation to finally conquer the entire realm and build an empire. And because of the ideology that they followed, they brought forth an entirely new political system at that time. They did away with the entire feudal system where you have autonomous lords of the realm that paid tribute and just swear fealty to the central court. They brought about the province system where every piece of land they conquered, they just appointed an administrator to take care of this land.
So and drawing a salary instead of giving them power.
Exactly. You have a regional manager or regional director, sort of. And this was extremely efficient, and it was extremely scalable. You don't have to deal with, different ideology or different points of view. You just say, HQ wants to do this. Your job is to implement this and do it. And it's scalable because the whole system is just a copy and paste, wherever they go. And so they were able to unify the entire realm and then standardize writing, standardize measurements, standardize the width of the roads, and basically form the root, the basis of what we now know as Chinese culture and traditions. And the accomplishments that happened under the first emperor, under the Qin dynasty when it was founded, even though it was just a short, 15, 20 years, as we have mentioned, I believe the total amount of accomplishment that was achieved during that short period of time is equivalent to all other accomplishments that came after it. Like if you put the 80-20 rule, that's like the 20% of the time in Chinese history that accomplished like 80% of everything that we know today. And another bit of trivia, China, the term China is basically from the Qin people. If we use the Zhou's translation, Qin was translated as CHIN, not QIN as in today, CHIN. And when the West was trying to name China, they used Qin as its basis and called it China. And so, yeah, it even gave China its English name today. So what's there not to be impressed about? Yeah.
How about the dynasty that you liked the least?
I mentioned briefly just now, I really don't like the Song Dynasty.
You're kind of foreshadowing that already.
Yeah, I really don't like the Song Dynasty.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much is this don't like?
I dislike them more than I like the Qin.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not 11.
Yeah, all the way up to 11, man. Yeah. Jet Black will be proud. Yeah. And I guess by saying what I say, I'm actually alienating a lot of Sinophiles, because most Sinophiles would go the totally opposite direction. They would love the Song Dynasty. I hate the Qin Dynasty. But I really don't like the Song. Number one, yes, they were economically the strongest in the world at the time. They were culturally extremely vibrant at the time. A lot of innovations happened during that time. However, what happened during the Song Dynasty really screwed over the Chinese people until today. I mentioned just now the Confucian reform and the Confucian revivalism happened during the Song Dynasty. And this reform was more politically it was more of a political reasoning behind this Confucian reform than any philosophical reasons. Confucianism was reformed to help the ruling class better control the masses. I think that's the way to put it.
So the ideology became politicized.
Extremely politicized. Extremely politicized.
Because Confucianism is hard to describe, right? I guess to somebody who's not aware of what it actually represents, because it's not quite a religion, is it?
It's a philosophy.
It's a philosophy, yes. So it should be more correctly labeled as a philosophy, an outlook. And you're saying that this revival, so it had its day before, but it had a revival, and then that ideology, that system of thinking became politicized.
Politicized, yes.
And in what way?
Okay, in a nutshell, to kind of shed a bit of light on what Confucianism is. Confucianism is basically the study of human relationships and the definition of human relationships, how people should be interacting with each other. Guanxi. And yes, in a way. And what is a person's place in the world, in society.
The hierarchy.
It is, I guess you could call it a very, very early form of proto-social science. That's what Confucianism is in a nutshell, if we're going to really simplify it. And what happened in the Song Dynasty was that the Confucian reform, what happened was that it made these guidelines, it turned all these guidelines into strict rules. So, rather than say that you should be doing this, it became, this is the law, that you must do this. You must respect your elders. You must be loyal to your king. You must be, it almost created a caste system in society. And the thing is, by this time, Chinese history, we already have social mobility, as in through the, what do you call it, the exam system, where you have the literati class who could take imperial exams to advance themselves. So you could be a peasant, but if you are a well-educated person, you could take the exam and then you could become one of the aristocrats or one of the ruling class. You become an official, the 状元探花, you become, this system. And the basis of this exam, there was only one topic, there was only one subject. It was Confucianism. So in order to elevate your social status to, from a peasant to maybe a ruling class, you have to pass the exam. And to pass the exam, you must be very good at understanding Confucianism.
You must have internalized it.
Yes.
To get to the level where...
You might not believe it, you might not have internalized it, but at the very least, you must be
Exposure,
able to write
yeah.
down. Yeah. To explain, what it is.
Exposure and practice, because there's the writing component of it as well, and then answering.
Yes. And this Confucian reform at that time that placed these very strict rules or human behavior on obedience, obedience to a higher authority, could be your father, could be your supervisor at work, could be, level by level, all the way up to the emperor. And this was not what Confucius intended in the first place. Confucius was talking about human relationships, how it should look and how to build a harmonious society. That was Confucius'
how to
intention.
Build rather than impose.
Yes.
It's two completely different approaches. And on that note, if I can further unpack the Song Dynasty.
Yes.
The population, I'm doing a bit of research on this online. I'm not sure if I can verify the source.
Okay.
But during the Song Dynasty, the population had increased from like 60 million to 140 million.
Oh yeah.
So they 2x or more than 2x their population.
Oh yeah.
And I'm wondering if is it then a necessary thing they had to do to impose such a system, because the population had ballooned to such a size it's difficult to exert control with a set of guidelines rather than laws?
There was a few different reasons.
Yeah.
One of the main reason was once again political, because the founder of the Song Dynasty, Zhao Kuangyi, he came to power through rebellion. He revolted against his rightful liege, rightful lord. So he rebelled and declared himself emperor. So after he gained power, he was like, I can't have another me happening. So he took away he was a general. Yeah, he was a military man. So after he came to power, he kind of stripped the military people of their powers and instead put this literati into positions of power to control the soldiers and the generals. And so he had to come up with a system to make sure that he have this total control over the people. And to be very honest, population growth, most of the time, I would say, during these imperial days, dynasty days, peasants are peasants. Peasants are not in the equation, basically. You want to...
They have very little agency. They are
extremely
subject to the flows. Yeah.
Yes. So unless something really exceptional happens, then they come into the equation. But usually, most of the time, they are not even in the equation at all. When making political decisions is usually just from the literati class and above.士子士大夫 class, that level above. Then they come into the considerations. So this reform and this implementation of this new reform was basically very political, to exert control over people who might pose a threat to the royal family. So yeah, the population growth, it basically just added to the coffers of the court. Not really much else. Yeah.
Because at the end of the Southern Song, according to what I'm looking at, of course, do your own research, everyone. The population was 39% of the global population by the end of Southern Song. At the start, it was 23% of global population. So that that's a lot of individuals added into the empire, if we will. Wow. Okay, that's pretty fascinating. It's a feat that they've never replicated ever since.
It's doubly fascinating, seeing, considering the fact that the song, the Southern Song, was actually less than half the size of China.
Because that's my exposure with the Shang Dynasty. I used to play this game called Sui Wu Zhuan, the Bandit Kings of Ancient China. It's from a floppy, before a floppy disk. No, is it the floppy disk or is it the 3 1/4? I can't remember, the more solid one. I remember playing on that. It was like in a race against time to kind of like unify the empire before at least what they called in the game the Northern Invaders. So that's my point of reference. So it's really interesting to have you unpack this part of Chinese history for me. So Confucian reform, you said, has screwed us over ever since. Would that be right to say? And
yes. And until today, we still have that. We are still unable to break
free of that
out of that straitjacket. Yeah.
That's a better way of putting it. So
it's a straitjacket.
It informs your behavior through what it tells you can do and you cannot do. Right?
Yes. Yeah. It's like a invisible OP marker that you put on yourself. Yeah.
Invisible OB, out of bounds marker. That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it's like a mental filter that actually paralyzes you from.
I mean, I have no issues with Confucianism, like what Confucius himself intended, but I do have a lot of issues with the Song Dynasty reform.
Politicization of that.
Yeah, of it. Yeah. I mean, it's good for rulers. This new reformed Confucianism is extremely good for rulers or anyone in the ruling class, but it sucks to be one of the people that's, being ruled by this ideology. Yeah.
If I can, I'd like to move us on to kind of like a more macro view of the significance of looking at Chinese history.
Right.
What have you learned by adopting this longer horizon? I think I could describe it as a longitudinal look at Chinese history. Has China ever been in a similar position as it is today?
Okay, this is a 2-3 part question.
Yeah.
So longitudinal look at things. First, it's not just about Chinese history. History is history. And to me, history is basically the study of human nature.
So you're arguing for a more neutral and unbiased look at. There's the cultural aspect, of course, to human behavior, but when you strip it down, there seems to be some running themes that go beyond just geographical location.
I mean, if we go by what Elon Musk will be calling the first order thinking, where you strip everything down and then you build back up from the first
principles. Yeah.
First principles. Yeah. So humans are humans. After humans, then you have different humans. That's such a bad way to put it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm interested in Chinese history because of the cultural and the stories aspect of it. But if we are talking at a very macro view, history is history. It doesn't matter which part of the world these people come from. They will all display the very basic human nature. So the study of history, when you're looking at history, is always looking at human nature at work. I mean, the times might change, the location might change, and today we'll say maybe platforms will change, but humans never change. We've been the same. We've been the same since day one, since the day we walked out of Africa with fire or something like that. We've been the same. We never change. So yeah, that is something that I realized.
If I can probe you there a little bit further, could you maybe help us unpack that a bit more? When you say humans don't change, that's referring to our operating system, or our methods, the way we organize ourselves?
Our nature, okay, this is going to be a very, very unpopular take.
Mm-hmm.
Human nature is selfish, self-benefits before everything else. We'll take care of ourselves, then we take care of our family, then we take care of our clan, then we take care of, it's a series of concentric circles.
Yeah.
So this is what human does. And if anything, history, if you read all kinds of history, it could be African history, it could be European history, it could be Chinese history. This nature is always on display. It's always taking care of myself or my people first. And this is human nature and history in a nutshell. How do I take care of my own people?
That's where the nuances fall, or the differences lie.
Where everything is different.
The what is consistent, the how.
Yeah. It's that. It's simply that. It's simply that. And we have, unfortunately, have not evolved to the point where we can look at humanity as, within that concentric circle, like the entire humanity in one circle. I do not believe that any one of us have evolved to that level. We are still differentiating. There is still a lot of us versus them in the world, in society today. Yeah.
When we're all sharing the same resource, the planet.
Yeah, until the Martians come, I don't think we will draw that circle because there's nothing external now.
There's no other.
There's no external threat. Human nature will always find an external threat to fight against. And that's what it is, and that's what history is. Yeah. So that's a longitudinal view of history. Yeah. And what was the second part of your question again? I'm sorry.
So from your study of Chinese history, China is situated in a very unique place at the moment. It's number 2 in a multitude of ways in relation to the US, in a time where the US had been the unipolar influence on the world's global structure today. So some call it the Thucydides trap, where it's inevitable that the rising power would have a confrontation with the incumbent power. So has China ever been in a similar position as it is now, when it was ranked number 2 and it has to, in a competition to, I don't know if that's indeed China's intention. That's for another discussion. But has China ever been in a similar position historically?
In short, no. In short, no. One thing a lot of people overlook is that the Western world, I mean, for want of a better word, the Western world has only been in a position of power for the past 200 years. If we take what you said just now.
The British Empire, and then post World War II, the Americans coming in.
So if we are talking about like what we mentioned just now, the longitudinal view of history, which we could say, if we want to talk about the Egyptians, or we want to talk about the Babylonians, 6,000, 8,000 years, all the way back, the Western world has only been on top for 200 years. I mean, let that sink in. 200 out of this millennium of history. They've only been there for that period of time.
Where they're the clear number 1.
Yes, where they are the clear, where they dominate in all areas. Only 200 years out of thousands. And if we are going to be more specific and look at China specifically, we mentioned just now, during the Song Dynasty, China's economy is triple the size of the entire Europe of the same time. And we are talking about the 12th century, if I'm not wrong. 11th and 12th century. So 11th, 12th century, China's economy is 3 times of the entire Europe. And it was even during the Ming Dynasty, until the 1400s, China's economy was still about 80%, 60% of the entire world. And if we put in the entire Eastern world, that means China, India, and all the Asia, if we talk about the entire Asia, throughout most of history, Asia has held most of the economical power on the globe. it was only 200 years that the Western powers that came to be on top. And so has China ever been in this position? No, of course not. Of course not. They have always been the dominant presence, in global politics since ancient history. The only difference is that China has never sought to assert itself on its neighbors. The Chinese do not have a colonization mindset. They do not seek to colonize. They only seek to be respected and recognized. Recognize instead of colonize. That's what China wants. Simple as that. Yeah. And you were saying to challenge for supremacy. I don't think they really want to challenge. Like, it's not their intention to challenge. But if they have to, they have to.
Yeah, because they are very sensitive about what is perceived as their domestic territories. For an observer, it might seem like an international confrontation, but in their minds, it's a domestic issue.
Which brings back to this whole series of dynasties rising and falling. You were saying centralized, split, centralized, split, centralized, split.
Yep.
And so to China, to the Chinese mindset, this is just another period where the empire was split. It would be reunified again. It should be unified again.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because my study of history is not deep at all. But from my observations of maps, at least, looking at maps, which are, of course, graphical secondary representations, they're not the real thing, but it's the best that I've got access to. The times where there were outward expansion is when there were non-Han dynasties in power. Would that be correct? Like the Manchurians, the Mongolians, there was eastward. Was that westward expansion?
Westward.
Yeah. There was westward expansion, right, towards Central Asia.
No. Actually, some of the biggest expansions came during the Han Dynasty and the Tang Dynasty.
I see.
Those were really very Han.
So they've gone both south and west, I'm assuming.
West. The Han Dynasty was when the Silk Road was built. The Han Dynasty was the one that actually consolidated the northwest, where they opened up the Silk Road.
Yeah.
That's during the Han Dynasty, during the Emperor Wu of Han Wuti.
Yeah.
That's where they consolidated the Silk Road. And
I see, the Silk Road, yeah.
Yeah, so from Dunhuang all the way out to the Stan, Xinjiang, and all these places, that was actually from the Han Dynasty.
And this was during the time of the Roman Empire. It's about the same.
200 AD. That's like what, after the Romans? 200 BC. Sorry, 200 BC. Yeah, about Caesar, Julius Caesar of 49 BC. This is 200 BC. So yeah, slightly before, around Julius Caesar's time. Yeah, so that's where we moved west, and back then we still did not colonize these places. We set up what was called the Western Protectorate. So they built military bases and garrisons along the Silk Road to protect the traders that were coming in from Persia and from the Chinese Empire, moving west into the Roman Empire and into the Persian Empire. And if I'm not wrong, there were actually some documents. This would be interesting, but I do not know them very well. There were some documents that talk about contact between the Han people of that time and the Roman people of that time. The was it the Byzantine? No, the Romans. Yeah, so they had contact. The traders actually had contact. Persia confirmed we had contact. As far as we know, there were contact between the Romans and the Chinese, and there were contact between the Egyptians and the Chinese. And that's how far the entire trade route went, the Silk Road. Yeah.
I've managed to pull something out from YouTube, which I'm going to share to the screen if that's okay. So probably don't need the sound.
Yeah, this Warring State.
So,
and this will be the Qin State.
The Qin State. Yeah.
And this is the Qin Dynasty. Yeah.
Then we progress onwards.
Yeah, this is the Western Protectorate, this part.
Yeah, so this is where we're at. This is where our conversation is at.
Yes.
So trying to find a path towards the West.
Yes.
The initials of the Silk Road, I believe. Building up, establishing for that. And then got the Three Kingdoms, which I must say I love because I used to play the games. I'm one of those that played the games. I've watched the TV series, but I've never really read the actual proper history.
most famous era in Chinese history.
Because so many ideas were exported from China at that time. I mean, Japan has a huge fascination for the Three Kingdom stories, as I'm told.
They are bigger fans of Three Kingdom than the Chinese.
Yeah, they're huge.
Yeah.
So we keep going. And yeah, it looks like it's all operating within.
Yeah, this line. And then the Sui moved out again.
Yeah.
And then the Tang will conquer all the way to all the stans. And the Tang court had a very large ratio of the Turks as officials. The Tang court was actually more foreigners than Han people, actually. The core will be Han people, but they actually took talent from wherever they can find.
Yeah.
So if you know the Japanese premier, the previous Japanese premier, Mr. Shinzo Abe, he was actually extremely proud of the fact that one of his ancestors was actually one of the court officials in the Tang court. And he will actually bring up that point quite often.
Wow.
Yeah.
We'll continue. That's an interesting note.
Yeah.
We'll keep unpacking the visual history. And yeah, so it seems to have reverted
this will
back.
be the five dynasty, 10 kingdoms.
The Jing, the Song.
Okay, that part is the Jing and the Song part would be we need to explain that a bit because that map. Okay, so this is the Song. This is the Jing. The Jing are the Jurchens.
The Jurchens that's up here.
These are Jurchens. Okay.
Yeah.
And Xixia, these are the Tanguts. The Xixia was the dominant northern power until the Jurchens came in.
Yeah.
And the Song was supposed to be all the way. The Chinese Empire, if we look at the previous map, would be supposed to be all the way even further up north.
See. Oh.
So they were pushed. So this was still northern Song, but then by the time of the southern Song, that map would be even smaller. The southern Song would be like maybe until here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the Yuan Dynasty.
The Mongols. So we have in Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, the rest of the realm at that time. Yeah.
Then as we keep going, it's now 1410 with the Ming Dynasty. This a little bit of headway into Southeast Asia, with I think parts of Vietnam. Then the Qing Dynasty, 1892.
And the Qing were the ones that actually formally took Tibet and count Tibet as its
for the first time, right? It never happened before.
And certain parts of Mongolia as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, the current northern...
So this would be the biggest footprint ever.
Yes. This border here is actually with Russia. And the Qing Dynasty during Emperor Kangxi, if I'm not wrong, was actually the time where this border was actually set. And it lasts until the early days of the PRC, where they renegotiated certain parts of the border. So yeah, this will be the biggest footprint, and this is actually the area, apart from Inner Mongolia, this area is that Qing map is the map that the Chinese government today will use as a reference for what they will consider their de jure land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like based on this visual representation, most of the inward and outward motions occurred within a prefixed geographical area.
Yes. Because this to the northwest is all desert, to the southwest is the Himalayas. Yeah,
I've been there physically, and so
it's geographically it's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have the present People's Republic of China, and then the Republic of China on this end. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, and thank you so much for going through that with us.
It's a pleasure.
If I can move on to another type of question, and this relates to what are some of the key observations you've made from Chinese history. Are there any running themes or patterns from about rather the Chinese model, if I can call it that you've noticed from your study of history?
I guess things are pretty much the same, similar across different civilizations, where you have a ruler and then you need to have a legitimacy of rule and stuff like that. Like we mentioned before, the what is always the same, is the how.
The how.
The how. And of course, there are some cultural differences between different cultures and traditions. So if we want to be very specific about some patterns of Chinese history, or what would set the Chinese or Eastern Asian way of doing things that's different from other people, I would say...
I like that description better. It's a way rather than a model.
Yeah. So I would say that it stems from a Zhou, partly geographical and partly cultural way this culture developed. Like in the East, in China and most of these Eastern Asian countries, we have what we call the agrarian culture that sprung up because it was mainly land mass, a lot of flat lands. So you have a lot of farms and you grow grain, and that's how you feed people. And that's how the economy grows, agrarian system, farmers, a culture of farmers. Whereas in the West, if we are talking about the birth of a Western civilization, we have to go all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans. And if we look at it geographically, that was an entire series of peninsulas, islands around the Mediterranean. And so agriculture was not really very possible in a lot of cases. And so what sprang up in the West was a very mercantile culture.
So trading was the basis.
Trading, a lot of trade. Whereas the East is a lot of farming. So this, over time, over millennia, we are talking about, a very long period.
We can grow stuff. On the other hand, let's exchange.
Yes. And what happens is that in order to be an agricultural society, in order for it to be successful, you must have it must be a collective effort. One person cannot farm a piece of land. So you need many, many people to farm a piece of land, preferably within a family or within a clan, and that's where we have this culture and mindset, this DNA of, okay, if one person is good, many people will be good together, If all of us work together, we can have benefits for all of us. It's a collective benefit kind of mindset. Whereas if we look at traders or even today businesses, trade and business is, I won't say all the time, but a lot of the time, most of the time, is a zero-sum game. For me to win,
there's a winner, there's a loser.
There's a winner and there's a loser, exactly. And so this will inform the evolution of the culture between these two parts of the world. So from a geographical to a lived experience to it becoming hard set into tradition and culture. So we always have to be mindful of this mindset difference between the two peoples, Of course, like I said before, human nature is always look for benefits, but it's how we look for benefits for ourselves. So in the East, because of the geographical and the reasons and the history of how this society were built, they have the how became a collective how. Whereas in the other end of the globe, it became an individual how of seeking benefits. So is one better than the other, or is one right and one wrong? No, of course not. It's not. Not one is not better than the other. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just how it happened and how it works for their situation. So that is the difference between the East and the West, and that is why today a lot of the West look at the East and they can't figure it out. Especially in this pandemic, like we all wear masks like it's nothing. We just willingly wear the mask, and not much of a complaint or whatever, just, oh yeah, we have to wear a mask, we wear a mask. Why? Because collectively is good for everyone. We are not thinking like, oh, I don't want to because I can't breathe, or I don't want to because I feel uncomfortable. There's no individual preference in this situation, because the bigger overriding concern is a collective good, and this collective good is an idea that is hard-coded into our DNA. Yeah. So yeah, specifically, like you say, how is it different in the East?
Cultural DNA that dates back from the foundations of the empire, because
not even the empire, I think dates back to the foundation of humanity on this piece of land. Yeah. Because even the early prehistoric people, if they want to farm, they have to farm together. There's no way you can farm alone.
Beyond that, so zero-sum game as part of the mental programming versus collective benefits. Is there another feature of running theme from Chinese history that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, the Chinese people are extremely pragmatic lot.
Pragmatic.
Extremely pragmatic. And basically, you could say that we are a-religious.
Pragmatic and a-religious.
Yeah. If you notice, since I went through the list of dynasties, there was no, and in fact, if you look at it today, there is no Chinese religion. There is no Chinese religion apart from ancestral worship and respect for the heavens. There's no codified.
So that's more like a ritual, right?
It's more of a ritual and tradition. I mean, a lot of people will argue, like when they say, what about Taoism? Taoism is not a religion.
If you read it, it's far from religion.
Taoism was actually one of the 10 schools of philosophy, that came out in the Warring Spring and Autumn period. So it became a religion later, much later, during the Han Dynasty, and once again because of political reasons. So yeah, even when it comes to religion, the Chinese are very pragmatic because it serves a political purpose. Confucianism is not a religion, it's a philosophy, it's a study of social structure. And Buddhism, it is a religion, but it's not Chinese. It came from India.
It was an import.
It was an import. So yeah, the Chinese people are not inherently religious. There is no, I mean, do we believe in a higher power? I guess so. I guess every human will believe there is some sort of a higher power. But are they religious about it? No. No. So these are very a-religious people compared to the West, if we want to put it that way. I'm so uncomfortable talking about East and West, but for want of a better word, okay? The West, of course, the development of the Abrahamic traditions, where you have a very black and white duality going on. You're either with us or you're against us. You're either right or you're wrong. So that is a very two-tone view that the West would take. And I guess that could be part of the evolution of their mercantile past, where it's zero-sum. It's always zero-sum, that way of thinking. So that could be part of it. Whereas to the East, it is more of a, you do you, I do me. As long as you don't overstep your boundary, I'm fine. Do whatever you need to do. Just don't tell me what to do. Yeah.
On that note of being a-religious, if I can offer a point to kind of complement that, because from your study, you have mentioned what is the mandate of heaven,
right, and
legitimization of authority.
Right.
Could you unpack that for us a little bit more, please?
The mandate of heaven, I mean,
天子, right? Is that, am I getting the...
天子 is son of heaven.
Son of heaven.
That is the person who holds the mandate.
Holds the mandate. Okay.
So the mandate of heaven is a 天意, 天心. So that is a political term to legitimize the rule of the king or the emperor of the realm, of the sovereign of the realm. It's a way to legitimize. I mean, you always must have justification for why are you overthrowing the previous ruler. They might have done something really crappy or whatever, but still, due to hierarchy, they are still your lord, they are still your king. So you must have a very, very good reason to overthrow him. And give the throne to yourself. And the only power that is greater than humanity is the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the heavens told me to do it. The heavens say that I have to do it. This is a mission from the gods or the mission from the heavens. And so I'm overthrowing the incumbent. And now that I'm on the seat, now that I'm on the throne, what is my legitimacy? Because I'm the son of heaven.
Right.
Why am I the son of heaven? Because I carried out the mandate of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are going to break it down, this is not some religious mumbo jumbo that's going on. This is a very political way of saying the
propaganda.
The mandate of the people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is the will of the people.
The will of the people. The mandate of heaven is the will of the people. That is, in fact, it is documented and written in certain old texts that the mandate of heaven is in actual fact the will of the people. Carrying out the mandate of heaven is representing and carrying out the will of the people. So that ideology has been ingrained in Chinese rulers since, thousands of years. For thousands of years, that has always been the mindset that I am representing and carrying out the will of the people. And why do I lose the throne? How do I lose the throne? When I lose the mandate of heaven. And what do they mean by losing the mandate of heaven? That means you lose the support of the people. You lose the will of the people.
Related to that, I guess getting that mandate of heaven gives you political influence over centralizing. Like, this centralizing is for you. It's for your benefit. It's the will of not just yourself, but the collective as well. Could you give us a few comments on the running themes of centralized power as a method of organization? Your thoughts on that, please.
Would you care to elaborate on the question a bit?
I think previously when we had a chat, you're relating to centralized power, shifting from an organizational structure from the previous hierarchical feudal style to a reward system, and also about the long-term intergenerational, intergenerational, like long-term thinking, I suppose, rather than just thinking of the immediate and the now. So if I can hand the time over to you, your thoughts on centralized power. Yeah.
Centralized power, I mean, a lot of people look at centralized power today as a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's efficient. It's the most efficient way of getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's another hot take, another unpopular view, but facts are facts. When the Qin Dynasty abolished the feudal system as it was in existence and moved into the centralized province system, we mentioned just now, he just appointed administrators into these different regions.
And in some ways, modern China is doing it with their 总书记, is the secretary.
Yes,
that runs the provinces.
It is basically the same system that has been passed now through generations for the past 2,000 years.
Yeah. So it maybe not quite runs, but it's responsible for the province.
Yeah. But it is the same system, of course, evolved with the times, but at the core of it, the province system is still the same system from the Qin Dynasty until today, where you have this province and then you have an administrator in charge of the province who carries out the will of the central government, which back in the day was the Qin royal court, the imperial court. And it's extremely efficient because you don't have a local warlord, a local duke or prince who maybe did not like certain parts of this idea and refuse to implement certain things. And you do not have a local warlord or a prince who would implement his own tax system, for example, because he wanted to make more money or build himself a new palace. Everything is standardized. They actually have what do you call it? The work review. Annual report. Annual review. Yeah, like today, the Qin Dynasty had that.
So it's a HR innovation.
There was, yes, exactly. I mean, imagine this was 200 BC, and they have these ideas that are so ahead of their time. Like, of course, these reviews did not happen every year. It happened every 3 years. So these administrators or every level of officials during the Qin, under the Qin administration, will go through this review, and if you did a good job, you know, you will be promoted or, you know, redeployed. If you did a bad job, you'll be fired, and yeah, the Qin being the Qin, most probably beheaded and executed if you did a bad job. So extra incentive to do a good job on managing the people and the land. So that was a system that was greatly efficient, and it is scalable, and it is a copy and paste. You don't have, of course, you localize for local situations, but the general form of the administrative system, the company structure, if you would, you know, the court structure can be copy and pasted all over the land, and that's why they can expand so fast.
So the number of innovations from the standardizing of language systems as well. During that time, making
and
it
that's
scalable.
just one of it.
And I recall from my visits to Chinese villages, you still see some memory of that. Like you enter each village, and then there is the notice board right at the very front of it with all the things you should do and you should not do. And it's very, very, for lack of a better word, physically black and white. You can read, right? There's no reason that you cannot make meaning
back
of
in
this.
the days, this actually came even earlier than the Qin, even earlier. So what happened? But the Qin adapted this system, the notice board at the village. So what happened was that, you know, back then not everyone could read, like you say just now. So they actually have this legal officer stationed at this near this notice board, where they will explain to the commoners about the laws and the regulations of the land to these villagers, so they have no excuse to break the law. Yeah, so this was a hangover from that time as well.
And another way to look at it is that there is absolute transparency. Like, it's all here. There's no hiding it. We're looking at the same.
Do this, don't do that.
Physical documents. If I can hold your time just for a little bit longer, because I'm monitoring it's already at close to the 2-hour mark. I think we will maybe sum up our conversation today with this one final question, and then we'll leave the aspects on the Chinese diaspora for another time.
So sorry for going on and on.
Yeah, that's all good. That's fantastic. It means we already have material for part 2 of this. So if I could kind of like round things up for us, from my perspective, what I'm particularly interested in is the rise and decline, the ebb and flows of the dynasties, and if there's any running theme. I do think people often make the mistake, and I'm not sure if that's the case, that in saying that Chinese civilization is the longest continuing civilization, because there's been so many times it had to fall apart and come back together again. Was there any specific dynasty that you've studied that has caught your attention the most in terms of, sorry for the 2-part questions again, in terms of the fall, number 1, and then number 2, in terms of its rise? So if we could start with the specific dynasty that you've studied that has caught your attention the most in terms of its decline, we'll start there, and then the rise afterwards.
I'll get to the fall in a while. The rise, I think we mentioned earlier as well.
The rise,
The rise, we mentioned earlier as well, the Qin dynasties, the rise from a small state to a imperial court to empire, from state to empire. That's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, and that's the velocity is insane.
Within about 160 years. 160 years.
Yeah.
I mean, if we are talking about the setup to the rise. So it's good administration, scalable systems, and efficiency and pragmatism. They are not hung up about idealism and ideology. They are very hung up about pragmatism. How can this be more efficient? How can this work better?
Let's focus on the numbers.
Focus on the numbers. Very, very technocratic way of doing things. Legalism. That is a very technocratic ideology. And is in the execution, how extreme they took this ideology. That was what allowed for the rise of the Qin dynasty. But at the same time, it was also how far they took this ideology that caused their fall. Because
where is the threshold?
Yes,
the system limits.
Where do you draw the line? Yes, where's the system limits in today's terms? That's what we'll say. So what happened was that power was so centralized that any little mistake in the central court would have massive repercussion throughout the entire realm. And that was exactly what happened after the first emperor died. He passed away, palace coup happened, political coup happened, and everything just crashed into pieces because the central government held so much power without checks and balances. And that was the ultimate demise of the empire. And that's why it lasted only 15 years, because it could not stand any small little deviation from the norm.
So not very nimble and capable of correcting itself.
Although we said that it was scalable, but it also comes to a point where the scale is so large that you can't really move very nimbly, or maybe the opposite is true as well. It's too nimble. Like every small change, every small tweak you make to the system,
butterfly effect on the rest.
Yes, the butterfly effect just spreads out and cause chaos across the realm. And so, yeah, that was a rise and fall. But ultimately, generally, if we are talking about declines of dynasty or declines of any form of political system, we have to understand, end of the day, if we are going to go back to first order of thinking again, that politics and governance is effectively about the economy. And the economy is about the control and distribution of resources. You know, there's this cake here. How do I distribute this cake to everyone so that everyone is happy? Am I right to say that? So a government, let's say a government of Singapore, is basically in charge of how to distribute the resources at their fingertips to the citizens of the people, and how to help the citizens, you know, acquire resources for themselves. That is the role of any government, be it a feudal government, an imperial government, or today in our modern day system. So politics and governance is about economy, and the economy is about control and distribution of resources. And generally, most of these ancient dynasties, if we look through history, be it Chinese, be it Western, be it any dynasty, any ruling system through history, most of them fail because the distribution of these resources became more and more lopsided. The ruling class started taking more and more for themselves because they got so comfortable and so complacent and so arrogant in their position that they lost touch with the ground, lost touch with the people, and they forgot, you know, that their job is to ensure that this distribution is, you know, at least not so unfair. And the result of this more and more lopsided, what do you call that, irregular, unfair distribution of resources, it got so bad that over time, the bottom rung of society will lack even the basic resources to survive. And that is what would cause an uprising or a revolt, because it's a death sentence anyway. I do nothing, I got no food to eat. If I revolt and I try to overthrow this dynasty, at least I have a chance.
So it gets so bad that the peasants eventually, with the backs against the wall.
Yes, peasant uprisings. There has been untold numbers of peasant uprisings in Chinese history. I don't know about the West, but in Chinese history, we have tons of peasant uprisings. Three kingdoms, like you love so much, started with the Yellow Turban Rebellion. What was it? It was basically
people on the fringe who were upset, and they were able to trigger off a chain of events.
They were starving. They
down
revolted.
To survival.
It's all down to survival. The bloodiest civil war in human history was a Taiping rebellion in the Qing Dynasty. I believe that civil war in China itself during the Qing Dynasty killed more people than the Second World War. That happened because the people were starving as well. So the Han Dynasty rose up under Liu Bang was also another peasant rebellion that overthrew the Qin Dynasty because resource distribution was not taken care of. And almost every other fall of dynasty is a version of this unequal distribution of resources, and the only difference is how politicized it was.
And of course, all this occurs in a place where you've got such critical mass in terms of population numbers. from the tens of millions in the early days to the hundreds of millions,
and if
to
I,
the billion. That's a lot of hungry people.
A lot. And if I'm not wrong, there was some kind of a correlation that some people made. Some people did a research, and they made a correlation between the population number of China and the peasant rebellions that were happening. And usually the peasant rebellions will happen when there was a period of peak population in China. And that rebellion would usually overthrow the ruling dynasty, and the new dynasty will come back. So that's an
litmus
interesting
test when the Chinese go hungry.
Yes. And you know, Chinese, we always say, 民以食为天. You know, food is most important to the Chinese people.
The hierarchy of needs, food.
Yeah. So when we don't have enough to eat, when we get hungry, we get hangry, man. And a hangry Chinese man is not someone you want to deal with.
Something we'll certainly unpack in a later episode when the Chinese get hangry. So if I could maybe just ask you for one more favor.
Sure.
To close off today's session, is there anything you'd like to recommend our viewers to read, to watch or experience, just to understand China that little bit better?
Okay, and let me put on show very perfectly human nature at play. Watch my channel. That Chinese history guy on YouTube.
That Chinese history guy, everybody.
Just go search for it. Watch my channel. Watch Bob's channel. He's doing great job regarding the Chinese diaspora. We've been friends for many years, and I know about his work for quite a while now. He's doing really great work. So watch Bob's channel. Go read Bob's papers. Go be his student in class if you want to. If you can. So there are a couple of channels on YouTube and podcasts that are pretty good if you want to understand a bit more about the Chinese history and culture. You know, Mr. Les Montgomery from Teacup Media is doing a pretty good job. Teacup Media also on YouTube, and there's this pretty interesting another podcast YouTube channel called The Chronicler Chinese History. So I guess we'll put the links to this channel in the description box, so you can check them out as well. So those are interesting channels. But end of the day, it doesn't matter what you read or what you watch or what you listen to. Most importantly, I believe, is to keep an open mind. Like, just keep an open mind and look at things from a higher altitude and a longer horizon, and think, really put on your thinking cap and think if what you read or what you've seen or what you heard actually makes sense when you look at it from a longer time horizon and from a higher altitude, because that is usually a very good way to figure out if things make sense. Look at it from higher and longer point of view.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Looking at things from a higher altitude and from a longer horizon point of view. This is the Both Sides Now podcast, signing off for the week. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, RP, for spending the time with us today. Take care, Bob. Everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And in 3, 2, 1...